Very pleased to say that I'm joined in the studio by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. Mr Sunak, as mentioned, you are but my second live face-to-face interview in 6 months, so I will try occasionally to be gentle, and we will be talking about Donald Trump in just a moment. But I wonder if we might begin with test and trace. Clearly, this was something, as the Health Secretary admitted yesterday, should not have happened. Can you please concede that because of this mistake, there is a likelihood that there will be people in the United Kingdom who have contracted COVID-19 as a result?
Well, Neil, good morning. And I think the Health Secretary was very clear yesterday, and I agree with him. This should absolutely not have happened, and that's why an investigation has been launched. I think the most important thing to focus on now is, what are we doing to fix the situation? As we heard yesterday, people worked over the weekend. Over half of those who had been tested were put into the contact tracing system as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning. Obviously, that would have been improved since then. And it's important to note a couple of things to your specific question. I think the Chief Medical Officer and the JBC, our centre that looks of all of this, have said that the numbers don't impact substantially their assessment of the virus and the measures that were taken last week. And in particular, and specifically, for care homes, schools and hospitals, that is not impacted because that system works slightly differently to this. So those things have happened. Those things have happened as
that specifically is not what I asked, though. Because of this mistake, there is a strong likelihood. Test and Trace was set up to try and halt transmission in the community. It failed. There is a very strong likelihood that some people will have contracted COVID-19. There is also a possibility that some people might have died as a result of this.
Well, I think you're right in the sense that there has been a delay in people being contacted, and the Health Secretary was very clear about that yesterday. Well, as soon as the situation came to light, I think several thousand extra man-hours over the weekend went into getting in touch with all those people. As of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, we know just over half had been contacted for a second time to catch up with where we should have been. You're absolutely right. I don't have an updated number on that, but obviously it would have improved considerably from yesterday morning. The most important thing now is to try and get through that as quickly as possible, and very good progress was made over the weekend.
I understand why no politician would ever wish to concede that they had put people's lives at risk, but demonstrably that is what has happened here. Reports of the world-beating nature of our test and trace system have clearly been greatly exaggerated, and we're going to be spending £12 billion on this. It's not value for money.
Well, I think that's probably not completely fair. If you think back to where we were, I think we were doing, at the beginning of this crisis, a few thousand tests a day, maybe at most 10,000 right at the beginning of this crisis. If you look at where we were a couple of days ago, I think 250,000 tests were carried out a couple of days ago, 300,000 capacity, and with a clear trajectory to get that up to almost 500,000 by the end of October. And
4,000 COVID-19 positive.
I think you said, yes, we have spent £12 billion. If you say, where has that gone? It's gone on taking up test capacity from 10,000 a day to 250 on to 500,000. But also, that puts us now ahead of almost all European countries in terms of our ability to test in every day. Is it perfect? No. Are we continuing to make it better? Yes. But I think it's worth taking a moment to just recognise the progress that has been made.
And I'm happy to give you that opportunity. But at the same time, 4,000 COVID-19 positive people went more than a week without being contacted by Test and Trace. It's not exactly perfect, of course, but that is a failure. And at this time, when we are spending so much money on it, I think people want to hear a government minister concede that.
I think government ministers and indeed Dido Harding have said very clearly at times when the system has been under stress. That's not something that we want to see. That's why we're putting the extra resources in, as you said, £12 billion. The number of tests have gone up considerably from the beginning. They're continuing to ramp up, and the performance metrics are improving. We now, it's just, I think on average, when I last saw, no one is going on average more than about 4 miles for a test. The vast majority of tests are coming back the next day, and the testing capacity and tests carried out are ramping up every day. That's all good progress. You're right, there's more to do, and I can assure you it remains a #1 priority of focus for us.
I suppose the problem for the government is this, very similar to the situation as with A-levels. People were warning you about the problems with the Excel spreadsheet, the problems with putting outdated hardware running outdated software at the crunch point in terms of getting the data into the system. Joanna Viana, fellow in epigenetics at the University of Birmingham, said this: when we started at the Lighthouse Labs in March, we advised against analysing the results in Excel and said multiple times they should recruit bioinformaticians to deal with the data. Why were we faffing around with Excel when the scientists were telling us not to?
Well, I think also the system we've designed has been designed in conjunction with our scientists. We have a huge degree of number of scientists who are involved directly with the government, designing these things, implementing them, making sure they work, whether that's at the JBC, the Joint Biosecurity Centre, or indeed Public Health England. They're also all scientists who've been involved in developing this. And I just go back to what I said.
Scientists, and they're not people who could have pointed out the fact if you're running an outdated version of Excel, you couldn't import this data.
There are people who are experts in data who are engaged in implementing this program.
They weren't doing their job then, clearly.
And I think, again, take a step back. We've gone from 10,000 a day to 250,000 a day. We're up, by the way, 40 or 50% from the summer. So even just more recently, the trajectory has ramped up. We're on a path for 500,000 by the end of October. And the percentages of people who've been contacted as quickly as we'd like continue to be strong and are improving.
I wonder if we could talk about Eat Out to Help Out, a scheme that many people took advantage of, and I must admit that I certainly did myself. But do you accept, as the Prime Minister did at the weekend, that Eat Out to Help Out might have contributed to the spread of COVID-19?
I'm not sure that's exactly what the Prime Minister said. He said, in general, insofar as hospitality is a source of transmission, that's why we should make sure we focus our attention on it to suppress the spread of the virus, which is why there are things like table service only, the curfew, etc., in place. But I think more broadly, if you think of the spread of the virus this time around, what's happening here is pretty much in sync with what's happening around the world in second waves, whether it's France or Spain, where very specifically our scientists said we were following exactly the same curve. So actually there seems to be more a feature just of the virus and the season than anything specific. And then on the scheme itself, I mean, if you look at where it was used almost the most in reference to the size of the population, the Southwest probably stands out. And indeed, the Southwest today is the region with some of the lowest COVID incidences anywhere in the country.
Public Health England data also shows between the 14th of August and the 20th of September, eating out was the most commonly reported activity in the 2 to 7 days prior to symptom onset. Correlation, perhaps not causation. But if you look at Manchester, their case numbers were 32.5 per 100,000. The week ending the 27th of September, that number was over 200 per 100,000. The week of the 2nd of October, it was over 500. You can't say for certain 100% that this scheme didn't contribute.
I think we were having a conversation before about data science, and you said it there. There's a big difference between correlation and causation. So I would be, I guess, cautious about jumping to simplistic conclusions. There's also different data, which also using Public Health England data, which hospitality industry has also analysed, and that showed a very small percentage of hospitality being a cause for transmissions. I think one thing we know is, and actually I speak to our scientists almost every day, it's incredibly difficult at such a granular level to pinpoint exactly the cause of transmission. And so I think we should have some humility about our ability to do that. Do we know in general that social contact is a cause of transmission? Of course we do. But that can also happen inside households. And whether in the Midlands, where we've seen before, that was identified as the key source of transmission was household mixing inside homes. So it is going to be different depending on where you are in the country.
Sure.
The exact source of the virus spread will vary. And that's why our response can be targeted and nuanced to the situation we confront.
How are we going to get out of this? From your speech yesterday, it seemed pretty clear that we're not going to be seeing a return to austerity, to cuts to public services. And that really indicates only one thing, doesn't it? Tax rises. So the question is, when do they come and where do they fall?
I think the priority right now is on jobs.
Sure.
And if you look at the various steps I've been taking, indeed, just a couple of weeks ago with our winter economy plan, my overwhelming focus at the moment is trying to protect and support as many jobs as possible. What's happening in our economy is significant and severe. Many people are losing their jobs. So the focus of all my attention in the short term is doing what we can to support as much employment as possible. Over time, yes, you're right, we need to have sustainable public finances. That's important to me, it's important to the government.
How do we achieve
but in the short term, the best way to have long-term sustainable public finances is to try and protect as much employment as possible.
Sure, but you can understand why people listening to you yesterday might wish to know where you are focusing on in terms of the tax rises that seem inevitable given what you've just said and what you said yesterday.
And as every interview I do, people would like to know about tax, and I give exactly the same answer every time. I can't comment on future tax policy. Tax policy is set at fiscal events. But I think that people broadly should be understanding that my focus right now is protecting jobs and employment. That's why all the various things that we've put in place, whether it's supporting small businesses through our new pay-as-you-grow scheme to help restructure bounce-back loans, whether it's the Green Homes Grant programme to help people insulate their homes and generate activity, whether it's the Kickstart scheme to help those who are young and at risk of long-term unemployment find job placements. All of that is targeted to the problem at the moment, which is supporting jobs.
When you say that we should be living without fear right now, what do you mean by that? I mean, it's fair enough for, you know, a fit, rich, good-looking 40-year-old to say live without fear. But for those who have lost their jobs or are about to lose their jobs or are perhaps in one of the shielding categories, it doesn't resonate. It's almost Trumpian. We heard this from Donald Trump, in fact, you know, last night. He said, don't be afraid of the virus.
Yes, and you also heard from the Prime Minister, live fearlessly but with common sense, and I fully agree with that. I think that it's important that we maintain some degree of confidence and optimism about our future, and actually that has an impact on our economic performance. You talk about jobs. Actually, if we have no confidence, and indeed this is a consumer-driven economy, consumption drives a large part of economic activity in this country. If people don't have confidence to do those things, that will actually have a direct impact on people losing their jobs. And it's because of that I'm so keen to make sure that we can try and maintain as much economic activity as possible. That's not an abstract concept. That's about protecting those jobs that you spoke about. And yes, you're right. For those people who are losing those jobs, that is tragic. It's something that I feel very deeply, and I want to make sure that we provide all of those people with fresh hope and opportunity, which is why our initiatives and new apprenticeships, new training, Kickstart scheme are so important.
You mentioned a comparison with Donald Trump a second ago in terms of the language that's used. Another thing that both you and he seem very fond of doing is putting your name on everything. Admittedly, with him, it's on terms of towers. With you, it's in terms of the political advertising. We have a look. There have been an awful lot of adverts over the past few weeks with your name on, with your face on. With the greatest respect, you're not the Prime Minister, so it does almost look just the teensiest bit narcissistic.
No, actually, I'm very new to politics in that sense. And actually, for someone who has a job like mine, where I'm responsible for the UK economy, I'm not someone who's been in politics for a very long time. And actually, understandably, most people probably didn't know who I was before I had this job. And maybe
well, they know who you are now.
And that's exactly the point, right? My job is to make sure that everyone in this country understands what I'm doing on their behalf, can question it, hold me accountable for it, and feel engaged with that debate. Now, that's easier for them to do.
Name me one other politician, apart from a Prime Minister, who ever sticks their name, their personal branding, over their policy announcements.
Well, I think we're actually living in a world where people can communicate in different ways. My main desire is to make sure everyone understands what I'm doing so they can question it, hold me account for it, know why I'm doing it. And I'm going to try lots of different ways to communicate with people. I'm not going to apologise for that. I want people to know what we're up to and so that they can question it and decide whether they like it, don't like it. Either way, that's the right they have. You mentioned the US. Actually, the vast majority of senior politicians in the US take an approach to social media, which is very similar. You just mentioned one, but actually lots of other politicians, and we can go into a long list of them, which most people may not have even heard of
but not here.
Over here.
But
the point is the same. But the point is the one about communication. I mean, this is one form of communication, and you'll have your listeners at home who are watching this. There'll be lots of other people who might have tuned into a LinkedIn Q&A I did last week, particularly focused on small business. There'll be others who see one of my explainers on YouTube explaining one of our policies and what it's trying to achieve. But again, if people feel that they know who's doing it and engage with the content, it's going to make for a much more informed debate in this country around our economic policy, and that's something I'm very keen to see happen.
The reason people focus on it is because often it is suggested that at some point in the not-too-distant future, you might fancy making the move from number 11 to number 10. At times like that, brand reinforcement is very, very useful. You did say yesterday that you would definitely not be running for the leadership. I'm just wondering, given the number of U-turns this government has performed, whether we can trust you entirely on that.
Yeah, no, as I said yesterday, I think the job I have is hard enough. And I see up close what the Prime Minister has to deal with every day. It's not an envious task. I think he does it admirably well. These are very difficult times. I'm grateful that we have his leadership. I think the country should be very grateful for that as well. And I'm just trying to focus on the job I have, which, as we talked about, it's a very difficult time to be doing my job. Hundreds of thousands of people are losing their jobs as we speak. Many more will. That's happening on my watch, and I need to try and do what I can to provide fresh opportunity for people and protect as many of those jobs as possible. It's plenty for me to be focused on.
Yeah, certainly no one, not even your arch political enemies, would suggest you have anything other than a very, very difficult job at the moment. So thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thanks
Chancellor,
very much.
Good to see you.